I'd like to invite Mr. John Gerzema, who is Chief Insights Officer at the Young and Rubicam Group. He's a well-known speaker, and he's been present at many conferences, including TED and The Economist. Mr. John Gerzema, it's a great pleasure and honor to invite you to stage. Thank you, John.
Cheers, thank you. What we're going to do is look at the state of consumerism and how it's changed as a result of the crisis. But I realize many of you don't deal directly in consumer demand, and so what we're also going to look at is innovative business models that are actually being created and driven by this new world order. What we're going to do is start a little bit about how we've developed this work. So I oversee a database called Brand Asset Valuator. This is the world's largest continuous database of brands in the world. Now, we've got 40,000 brands in our study, and we do data across 50 countries to understand how people's lives are changing, what values they are looking for, and what attitudes they have, not only in the consumer marketplace, but in terms of their lives. So it's a very robust panel that we use to sort of understand where things are going. We've invested over about $130 million in the study. And so what I'm going to do is kind of unpack that this morning and look at some trends, because what I also did for my most recent book, Spend Shift, was go out and interrogate 50 executives, C-suite executives from startup founders and others to really understand how their business models had changed as a result of the crisis. Basically, one of the key tenets that we find is that we're in this era where we're moving from mindless to mindful consumption. Now, what does that mean? It means that even though we find ourselves less rich as a society, most of us, we're actually shifting our emphasis to support companies and brands that reflect our values. Now, when you use the word values, that sounds very conservative versus liberal, and it wasn't the case. In fact, what we saw the world over was that people were looking for brands and companies to be more ethical, to be more transparent, to support communities, to find ways that they could actually connect on a real level with people. So in this context, what people are happening is that they're using their wallets and their purses as a form of voting. Now, why did this happen? We've seen a substantial trust. We liken it to a trust virus that's basically taken over categories over the course of the last 3 years. Now, we would have expected to see this in the financial industry, in the automotive industry, where taxpayers became shareholders. But interestingly enough, we saw it across a wide range of different categories, including accessories and apparel, including distribution and retail. What we can take away from this is that people are actually stepping back and questioning and really trying to get a deeper understanding of the company behind the brand. What is it that you stand for? How can you help us understand why we should trust you in the first place? Now, the other thing we did is we looked at 3,000 brands worldwide, and we said, why do you buy brands today, and how has that changed? What we find is that we're starting to see a shift away from the things that are a little bit more opaque, things that are more about how I use a brand to sort of represent myself, to things that are more intrinsic and more authentic. So a shift from mysterious, confident, trendy, glamorous, to high quality, socially responsible, and kindness and empathy. Ladies and gentlemen, kindness and empathy went up 391% after the crisis. This was the single biggest shift we had seen in a brand attribute in our data going back to 1993. Now, what we can take away from that is marketing today is not about words, it's about actions. How do you demonstrate exemplary customer service to really connect with people and understand their lives if you choose to sell them a product or a service? So what we're going to do is briefly look at 5 trends that we're seeing in our data. The first place we're going to start with is a sense of optimism, that despite the crisis around many parts of the world, there remains a strong degree of resiliency and a sense of opportunity, not only with consumers, but also with entrepreneurs. We'll look at an example of that. This is Toria Blanchard. Toria Blanchard owns a small creperie in Detroit called Good Girls Go to Paris. Now, she got in trouble as a teenager, and her mother scolded her. And she said, Toria, if you really want to become a culinary leader, you better get your act together. She did. She moved to France. She came back, and she started a creperie in the middle of inner city Detroit. Now, if you go to Detroit today, the average price of a house is $14,000 US. And yet, we saw Toria and many other entrepreneurs rushing into Detroit to take advantage of lack of municipal oversight and infrastructure. In fact, for my book and the research, we actually interviewed artists living in $200 houses and a whole range of entrepreneurialism that was happening in the Motor City. The other thing we've seen is a movement away towards sort of return to grace and manners. Do you remember the Letitia Baldridge sort of school of etiquette? Well, that's been lost in the informality of the internet. So here's an example of a company that's bringing it back. This is Paperless Post. They're a Brooklyn-based startup, and what they do is they bring back the art of manners. Why send an email to invite someone to a party? Why not send a handcrafted letter, except it's all sent virtually over the internet? Or this is an interesting company. This is a UK startup that's very popular with millennials called Granny's Inc. This is what Granny's Inc. does. It's a network of grandmas that hand knit scarves and sweaters and jackets. Their tagline is, "There's wisdom in the wool." And the really interesting thing about this business model is you can actually pick out your own granny to do your sewing for you. Now, I think this is really interesting. Here on one hand, you have high tech and social media with the idea of authenticity, longevity, and wisdom. Again, looking at the undercurrent of values that are driving many of these new business models. Other things we saw is the remarkable success of Microsoft Connect. Now, if you go back and you look at the data, they actually sold more Connects in the fourth quarter of last year than they did iPads. One of the really interesting things that happened with Connect is that it became a subject of hacking. Now, hacking is basically the practice heretofore known as creating something that's not good. But hacking can be productive. Hacking can be making. And in fact, with Connects, many people have learned how to hack them to do new technologies. So this is an example of Microsoft Connect creating a gesture-based MRI demo for doctors to use this technology. So right now today in New York, there's the Tech Disrupt conference where people are looking at new ways to hack existing innovation to create new technologies that are going to further us. Other things that we're doing is we're doing remarkable use of crowdsourcing. This is a Navy-sponsored event to crowdsource, basically crowdsource solutions to online gamers to help solve the problem with the Somali pirates. Now, we also saw new trends around this idea of not being fenced in. The idea during the crisis was many people got way too over-leveraged, right, in terms of their credit cards and their houses. And so what people are starting to do now is finding ways to retool themselves to learn new skills so they can spend less, but importantly, spend more on the things that they admire, the categories and brands that they really want to spend money on. So one of the founders of a company that I interviewed for my book is Rob Kalin. He's the founder of Etsy. Etsy is a $300 million valued company, didn't exist 2 years ago. It's a network, an eBay of handcrafted goods where people can roll up their sleeves and make things and sell them on Etsy. Also, there's new ways to motivate yourself. This is a new gym that plans to require members to pay more if they don't work out. Now, interestingly here, this is another trend that we saw in a lot of our data, this sort of demasking of our ego, trying to find ways to motivate ourselves to be more authentic and to be more genuine. Now, the other thing we're seeing is a dramatic attack in interesting new technology around the existing financial structure. I mentioned earlier that there's lack of trust in banks. There's a whole bunch of new companies from Bitcoin to Bank Simple to Venmo that are taking on credit cards and taking on retail banks. The way Venmo works is that you join their network and you can basically create currency transfers within a social network. So imagine you being able to spend money and pay your friends off the same way that you might through Facebook. Really interesting business models here trying to attack the lack of trust in the financial institutions as currency and community start to become as one. The other thing I did is I interviewed the CEO and the founder of Patagonia's Footprint Chronicles. This is a very interesting company. What they're attempting to do is create radical transparency across their business. So with the Patagonia Footprint Chronicles, what you do here is you click on any one of their garments on the website, and you can go and look at path to purchase of that garment being made, the social responsibility of the labor practices, as well as the carbon footprint. What Patagonia is attempting to do is move corporate social responsibility from an initiative to a conversation with the wider marketplace. The third of the 5 trends that we're going to look at is a trend that we call the badge of awesomeness. Now, the badge of awesomeness was coined by a founder of a new startup, and more about her in just a second. But the idea in the badge of awesomeness is that today, thrift can actually be cool. The reason thrift can be cool is that you can save your money to not buy things that you don't necessarily need and really focus on categories and brands that you really want. So don't mistake this for being thrift is cheap. It's thrift is smart and strategic. We're witnessing a strategic consumer today. So this idea of being more nimble and adaptable, getting rid of fixed costs that you don't need so you can concentrate your spending is another trend. So the woman who coined this phrase is a startup entrepreneur named Maura McCarthy. Maura McCarthy has a company called Blue Homes in Waltham, Massachusetts. In the back of an old 200-year-old schoolhouse, they have a factory, and they basically create prefabricated homes. Now, the interesting part of their business model is you spec out your home on the internet, and they ship it to you. They have a unique hinge design, so the entire house folds up like an origami and can be shipped by rail or freight. All you need is your land and your energy and your water hookup, and you're ready to go. But what Maura talked about is that these homes are actually an anti-McMansion. So rather than spending too much money on a house you don't need, you actually can get a beautiful, eco-friendly home that allows you to live within your means. Now, the other interesting part about this is that they're adaptable and they're modular. So if you get a raise, add a room. Have a kid, add a room. The whole idea here is there's a strong badging component around this, staying within your means and spending where you really want to spend your money. The other thing we saw is a new business model around dynamic pricing. One of the challenges that the San Francisco Giants had was how to fill seats at Major League Baseball games during the recession. So Russ Stanley, who's head of ticket sales, he and the Giants front office came up with an innovative solution. Because baseball is all about statistics anyway, they created a model called dynamic pricing. And the way it works is this. It basically sets the value of the price of a ticket based on what you, the consumer, are willing to pay for it. And since we're all individuals, we all have different needs. So the way it works is the prices vary based on pitching matchups, team records, and even weather. So an interesting way to think about pricing on a more customized and personal basis. Now, this is a really interesting startup company as well, created by two Wharton graduates, and it's called Warby Parker. Now, they make lenses, right? They make glasses for us to wear. The interesting thing about their business model is that they have an insight that buying glasses at the glasses store is a distressed purchase. So think about it. If you've ever bought glasses, you've gone and you've got that stuff in your eyes, it's all blurry, you can't see very well. You go into the store, there's a pushy salesperson trying to get you to try on glasses. You basically have about 5 minutes to make a decision on those glasses before it's revealed to everyone in the store that you're a bit vain. Now, the interesting thing they do is they shift the burden of customer service away from the company and onto the customer. The way it works is this. Instead of going into a store, you upload your photo onto the Warby Parker website, and you can virtually try on hundreds of pairs of glasses. If you're still not convinced that you know which frames are right for you, they'll actually send you blank frames in the mail so you can decide if you want to buy them. Now, the interesting part about this business model, I call it slow selling. Slow selling is based on the idea that why not shift the burden to the customer, don't pressure them to buy, because if you have a great product and you can stand behind it, you're going to have greater customer satisfaction in the end. And in terms of the industry, Warby Parker has the highest levels of customer satisfaction on the basis that people as consumers have internalized that choice and are living with it.